Wet dirt was still clinging to his knees as he stood there, in front of his apartment, trying to keep himself under control. He had done it, he told himself, but felt no kind of joy or excitement. Yeah, well, his grand price would be that he wouldn't spend the rest of his life in prison or even on death row. Simon felt the keys shaking between his fingers and tears welling up in his eyes. Now he had to wait for the police to turn up when someone realized Michael wasn't there anymore. How long would that take? He had absolutely no idea. Mikey had been almost a shut-in this past half a year. Simon hadn't seen any friends nor heard him calling anyone. Shit, the guy hadn't left the apartment in the past 3 weeks at all. So, would anyone even realize? Maybe the school? Maybe he had a part-time job. Simon couldn't even imagine it. He had seen him walking around in his disgusting tidy-whities for days on end, completely unkempt and unwashed. No one would hire someone looking like that. And even a remote job would have demanded he at least look presentable during the online meetings. There was no way he had a job. So, family? Would they look for him? Or how long until they did? Simon shook his head again. He wasn't sure. He thought he had heard his roommate talking to someone on the phone once, about 6 weeks back. And sounding annoyed. Might have been his mom or dad or a sibling. But there was, again, no way to know for sure. It wasn't like he had talked much to Mikey. At least outside of their almost daily quarrels. His roommate had been the most disgusting, arrogant prick he had ever seen. Simon had tried to get out of this apartment for months now, but no matter where he had looked, all the other rooms had been far out of his price range. Well, at least the rent was coming out of a shared account, and Mikey had set up an automatic transfer. So maybe no one would realize what had gone down in the apartment now 8 hours ago. When Mikey had finally pushed him too far. It had started like any normal argument between them. He had been sitting in the kitchen, eating, when his roommate had appeared and had hucked a loogie right into the sink, only an arm's length from him. Simon had to admit that he had raised his voice first, the stress and pressure of his normal life finally bubbling to the surface. He had gotten right in Mikey's face and had screamed at him to shape the fuck up. Which had, inevitably, led to his roommate screeching back. Only this time they hadn't stopped at words. Simon had shoved first, trying to get the stinking man-child away from him before Mikey had punched him in the face. He could still feel the painful swelling beneath his left eye. From then on, the fight was a blur. He remembered hitting back, screaming, then kicking the guy. Somehow he fell and bumped his head on the counter. At first, Simon had thought he was fucking with him. Then the shaking had started. Before he could even get himself to do anything, he had watched a light go out of his roommate's eyes. What he remembered most was the silence. He had stood there, looked down at the motionless body, and suddenly realized how quiet the apartment was. Simon had thought about calling an ambulance or the cops, but something inside of him had kept his hand from pulling out the phone. He would land in prison for murder. Even though it had been an accident, He was the one who had pushed Mikey into his fall. There was no way in hell for him to pay a lawyer good enough to get him out of this mess. So, he had simply kept standing there, watching. For an hour, probably. Maybe more. No matter how many times he had blinked, how deeply he had wished for it, the body hadn't disappeared or woken up. Simon felt the sweat on his brow again as he remembered it. He had thought about calling someone, anyone, to ask for help, but had decided against that as well in the end. No one he knew would risk their own life or freedom for him. They would call the police. Each and every one of them. So, he had stopped, put down his phone, and had done the only thing he could think of. He had gotten the carpet from Mikey's room, together with a few pieces of clothing, but not the phone, and had wrapped it all up. It had taken him another half hour to carry the body down through the stairwell, always watchful of other people, and put it in the trunk of his car. Thank God no one had looked out or come out of their apartment while he had lugged a heavy body, rolled up in a carpet, through the building. He had driven out of the city without getting stopped by the police and had dumped the body in a ditch far from any road or hiking trail. No one should find it, at least not for years, maybe decades to come. By then, all the traces of their fight would be long gone, and if anyone asked about Mikey, Simon could simply say he didn't remember when his shut-in roommate had up and vanished. They wouldn't be able to link him to the disappearance, he promised himself again, took a deep breath, and put the key in the lock. 8 hours had passed since they had fought. The sun would be rising soon. There was no blood splatter in the kitchen. He had checked again and again, so he wouldn't even need to deep clean that space. All he had to do was live his life as he normally would, as if nothing had happened. Nothing has happened, Simon whispered to himself. He turned the key in the lock, opened the door, and stepped into the completely silent apartment. His pulse was racing out of control. He could feel sweat running down his shivering body. Everything was okay, he told himself. Simon took off his jacket and hung it onto a hook next to Mikey's old coat. Should he make that one disappear as well? No one would go out at this time of year in just a shirt, right? Well, a psychotic shut-in actually might, he answered himself, then shook his head and made a mental note of throwing the coat away somewhere close to some homeless people in a few days. What he needed right now was a shower, then a coffee, and then to put all his clothes into the washing machine. Everything would be all right. He would clean the kitchen later. Blood splatter or not, he needed to make sure there would be no trace left behind. Simon turned toward the bathroom and picked up his phone from the radiator next to the door. He had left it behind as well. Someone might be able to get his phone's location, and now all it would show was that he had left it behind in the apartment. Nothing would lead the police to the place where he had dumped the body. If anyone ever asked, he could claim that he'd taken a drive to cool off after another fight with his roommate. The more time passed, the harder it would be for the police to prove. Simon stripped down and hopped into the shower. He could feel the warm water washing away all the grime, dirt, and sweat that had accumulated on his skin. Everything would be okay, he told himself. Clattering noise reached his ears, and Simon jumped out of the shower in an instant. He wrapped himself up in a towel, still completely drenched, as he stormed out the bathroom and ran up the hall. Someone was in the apartment. Who? Did Mikey have a guest here? Shit. No, that was impossible. Simon had never seen him as much as talk to another living being in person. Then, was it one of his exes? No, he had never given anyone a key to the apartment, which only left the landlord. But he couldn't have come in here, right? Simon rounded the last corner, jumped over the threshold of the kitchen, and completely froze on the spot. A guy was standing by the sink, wearing pajamas. His red, unkempt hair was hanging down to his shoulders, while his whole upper body moved back and forth. Mikey? Simon breathed. The man turned around and smiled while giving him a short, happy wave with the sponge still in his hand. Hey there. Thought I cleaned the kitchen a bit. It's been in a state those past few months. I hope I didn't wake you. Simon could feel a cold hand gripping his heart. He was shaking, trembling from head to toe. No, this wasn't a twin, this wasn't anyone else. He could see it in the guy's eyes, and even though their gaze was far softer and less arrogant, Simon knew who stood before him there. Not at all, no. I think that's a good idea. I need to finish my shower. Then I'll help. He stuttered, still trying to get his head around what had happened. How? Why? Had he imagined everything? No, that couldn't be it, could it? Was that what a psychotic break felt like? He was sure. He had seen the body. But don't worry about it, man. I know you've done much more than me ever since you moved in. So just let me clean up for once. Enjoy your shower. I'll just take one in a few hours. And you should really sleep in today, you know? You look dead tired. Simon could feel the barb hidden in the sweet tone, but the smile of his roommate never wavered, never changed. All he could do was nod, then turn around and head back to the bathroom. What the fuck was going on here? He could feel his thoughts racing, followed by a sudden, unexpected headache. Was he losing his mind? Yeah, that had to be it. How was Mikey still alive? Simon entered the bathroom, dried himself off, and looked into the mirror. Yeah, his eyes were completely bloodshot. He seemed tired and exhausted, but, well, he didn't feel insane. What he needed now was sleep. Coming to a decision this instant was not a good idea. He would do nothing for now, just rest a bit, and then take another look at the kitchen. Maybe he had only imagined Mikey being there, cleaning. Simon wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Even his hallucinations were completely insane. Mikey never would have cleaned the kitchen for any reason. He shook his head, splashed some cold water on his face, and stashed his clothes in the washing machine. Just a few hours of rest, and he would be able to see more clearly. Take a fresh look at it all. And maybe call a psychiatrist, he added with a humorless grin. He headed out of the bathroom, still only wearing a towel, and could hear someone whistling in the apartment. Completely insane, Simon thought with a frown. He walked past the open door to the kitchen on his way to his room and couldn't stop himself from turning his head and looking inside. Mikey was still scrubbing the sink while whistling a tune and only turned as Simon stopped for a moment. "Go catch some shut-eye, man," he started again, merrily. "No reason for us both to be up right now, you know? It's still the dead of the night, after all." Simon shuddered as he saw the smile and wink, turned away and walked into his own room. That day, he made sure to lock the door behind him before he fell into bed and closed his eyes. Simon's dreams were weird. There was no other way to describe them. He could see Mikey's dead body on the kitchen floor suddenly opening its eyes and staring up at him. In some of the dreams, he was lying in the ditch in the woods next to the corpse. In others, it chased him through the empty night. He woke up time and time again, feeling even more tired than when he had laid down. But every time he closed his eyes, he found himself in another nightmare. The only constant that followed him in and out of his dreams was that damned whistling. Always the same melody, never changing, never ending, whistled by someone he knew should be dead. It was noon when he finally managed to get his head off the pillow and pulled his phone closer to his face. Now, he truly felt insane. His whole body was hurting. He had this awful taste in his mouth, and the far too vivid pictures from his nightmares seemed to combine into new horrors in his mind. Simon groaned, but got up and dressed himself. He really did feel that tired, exhausted beyond measure, but the sleep he so terribly needed would never come until he had done something about this nightmare in real life. He knew. With another groan, he stretched his back and felt the muscles in there spasming almost out of control. A consequence of lugging the dead body around, he thought, then immediately corrected himself. What if it hadn't really happened? If he had hallucinated the fight and everything? If Mikey really still was alive? He opened the door and stopped to listen for a moment. The washing machine was running. Someone was whistling, but not in the kitchen this time. Simon shook his head and took a step out of his room. He glanced at the kitchen, which was now absolutely spotless. What the fuck? A low murmur came out of his mouth. Whatever the case, if he was insane or not, this shouldn't be possible. Neither a dead Mikey nor an alive one would ever really clean the apartment. Simon stumbled and caught himself on the frame of the door. The thud echoed around the flat, and suddenly the whistling stopped. Footsteps were coming toward him, and as he looked up, he could see Mikey dressed like a normal human being, but with rubber gloves racing in his direction. "Everything okay, man?" he heard his roommate ask, and only managed a weak nod. A hand grabbed him under his shoulder and supported him as he was slowly dragged into the kitchen. "It's warm," Simon wondered. Not cold like the dead body he had dumped in the ditch, but warm like a living human being. He carefully guided him to a chair while smiling at him constantly. "Sit down, relax. I'm gonna make you a coffee, okay?" His mind screamed at him to wake up from this dream as well, but Simon knew that it was reality he was facing right now. Even though the voice of his roommate matched, the words coming out were too strange. This would never happen. "Thank you," he managed to mumble, and immediately saw the man in front of him whirling around and heading to the coffee machine Simon had bought them when he had moved in. Long before all of this, even before he had realized what a piece of shit Mikey was. Simon pressed his hands against the sides of his head, and the pressure seemed to help him. What had happened? What had really happened? Had he killed Mikey and left his corpse in a ditch outside the city? Then who was here with him, making him coffee right now? Or had he imagined it all? Then why was Mikey so different now? He could still feel the muscles in his back spasming at every breath. His injury stemmed from lugging around something heavy yesterday. There was no denying that. He needed to know. There was only one place where he could find answers. "Sorry, but I need to go." Simon suddenly burst out and jumped up from the chair. His roommate looked at him, but the smile was still exactly the same. Unnervingly sweet. He needed answers, Simon repeated in his mind as he whirled around and ran through the apartment for the entrance. The pain was almost unbearable, but this fog in his mind had lifted. He couldn't wait any longer. What was real and what was not? Once more he turned around at the shoe rack, looked back down the small hallway and could see Mikey standing there in the open door of the kitchen, smiling and waving. He couldn't deal with it right now, not without knowing what had really happened. Simon forced himself to look away from the person and rushed out of the door, the key to his car already in his hand. This urge to know had woken him up completely. He still felt the pain in his body, but the tiredness was dissipating with every step. What would Mikey do while he was out? Would he continue cleaning the apartment? Simon didn't even want to think about it. Something had changed with him completely, and there was no way of knowing what it was. Simon reached his car, hopped in, and turned on the radio as he started to drive. He was playing music as loud as possible to tune out the voices in his head. Driving out there at this time took him far longer than the night before. He could feel his heart beating faster and faster the further he got. Finally, after turning onto the highway, he could see the traffic speeding up. As he reached the rest stop he had used last night, his racing pulse could be felt in his head. Calm down, he tried to tell himself, but he couldn't even stop the shaking of his fingers as he pulled the key out of the ignition. What would he do if he found the ditch empty? No, don't think about it. Simon growled and forced himself to leave the car. There was no point in imagining possible scenarios. He needed to find the place first. Then he could think about what to do next. Simon shook his head, locked the car, and jumped over the small railing at the side of the rest stop. Woods stretched out before him, but today they looked far less ominous and dangerous than last night. He probably would have lost his mind in there if he hadn't purely focused on what he had to do with the body. Maybe he had lost it, he thought with a grim expression on his face, as he started walking through the trampled down underbrush he was to blame for. It was easy, following the path he had taken, and the only thing that would keep other people from doing the same was that no one would simply walk out into the woods from here. The only people stopping at the rest stop were truckers, or families that needed a short break. But no matter how much Simon tried, he couldn't completely shut down the thoughts still plaguing him. If the ditch was empty, he would need to check himself into an institution. Because that would mean he had only imagined killing Mikey. Then, why the sudden change? Had he done something else yesterday? Scared the living daylights out of his roommate bad enough to make him behave? Now he couldn't stop himself from grinning like an idiot. That was impossible, right? Well, at least he was sure he had come along here. The path with its broken twigs and trampled down vegetation was clear in front of him. Just follow the damn trail and you'll get your answers, he mumbled as he walked around a tree that had fallen over long ago. The body was farther in, far away from everyone else. Simon continued at the same pace. He could still feel his heart racing and thought he could smell something in the air, but knew that it was impossible. Even if there was a dead body up ahead, it wouldn't have started to decompose already. He continued, while now swatting insects away from his exposed neck, as he suddenly could see the trampled down path ending up ahead. This was it, the moment of truth. His mind was telling him to be careful still as he stopped for one last deep breath. No point in putting it off any longer, Simon whispered to himself and forced his feet to walk forward. He could see the outline of the ditch already and now smelled something that definitely was real. Sweat and the odor of the old, unwashed carpet. His heart was beating even faster now. Had he stolen Mikey's carpet and buried that here? A pounding headache shook him, but he didn't avert his eyes. Simon stepped forward again and could see the dirty red edge of the rug. Something was in there. He hadn't come here completely on his own last night. Simon closed his eyes and took 3 steps before opening them again. He could feel the blood in his veins freezing. There it was, below him in the ditch. He could see the red hair and the pale skin where insects were already sitting, gorging themselves. Yeah, he had really done it. Mikey was lying there, dead and gone. Simon could feel his heart almost stopping. Then, who was back in the apartment? Who had cleaned it back to front? That hadn't been a hallucination, right? He turned and started running. The whole way back, Simon couldn't stop thinking about the dead body. It was real. He had killed him and dragged him out there. This was real. He reached a car in record time, jumped in, and raced back the way he had come. The afternoon sun was already slowly moving down, while in his mind different scenarios fought with each other. What if he was hallucinating Mikey back in the apartment? Or would he now return to a completely empty home? He wasn't sure which he would prefer, if he was honest. Still being insane or... Well, there probably was another explanation. Other cars honked at him as he wound his way through the traffic, driving like a madman. It didn't matter. If Mikey was still there, he would need to get professional help. He would probably end up in prison, but what was the alternative? Staying in an apartment with what was essentially a hallucination brought forth by his own guilt. How long before he would completely lose his mind and do something that would end up putting him in a psychiatric ward for the rest of his life? He could see the building where he and Mikey had lived together already and gritted his teeth. How had everything in his life gotten this bad, this quick? His whole future was gone. Was there no way out for him? Simon drove down into the underground parking garage beneath the building and stopped his car. What should he do? What could he even do? He was shaking, his heart was racing, and the stamped headache didn't subside. The stress was breaking him apart, bit by bit. What he really wanted was to start the car again and just drive off, leave everything behind and find a new life anywhere else. But he couldn't do that. The police would find him. He groaned and forced himself to step out of the car, then head up the stairwell. One of the other people living in an apartment here saw him coming and shook her head. "Can you guys please stop the incessant fighting? You're giving me a headache." The old woman hissed as he passed her by without another glance. "There won't be fighting anymore, Gladys," he mumbled and kept walking. 4th floor. He reached the landing and felt the pressure getting worse and worse. What if he was still there? What if he wasn't? Which option was preferable? Simon reached the door, put his key in the lock, and opened it. The apartment was silent. No whistling, no noise from anyone cleaning. He could feel sweat on his back and brow again. Simon stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Still, no answer. Was he gone, now that he had seen the body? Had his mind calmed down? He walked through the completely spotless flat, but his feeling of dread didn't subside. Someone was in here with him. Simon reached the kitchen, and his eyes immediately fell on the figure sitting in one of the 2 chairs, waiting for him with a smile on his face. "Sit down," he heard, before he could even react, and his body did as the man had said. A cup of coffee stood before him, but Simon could only concentrate on the smiling face of the cleanly dressed man sitting on the other side of the table. "Take out your phone and call the landlord. I talked to him an hour ago and you're gonna make sure he got it. Got that?" Simon nodded, still wide-eyed, and felt his hand in his pocket, grabbing the smartphone and pulling it out. He couldn't resist. The unwavering smile in front of him now had taken on a completely different meaning. There was no way for him to say no anymore. The landlord was surprisingly friendly, told him that he didn't care where the money for rent was coming from, and even wished him a pleasant evening before he hung up. Simon was still sitting there, completely confused. "Now, you know I'm not a hallucination, killer," the man across the table said with a smile, then suddenly stood up and Simon jerked back. He was coming toward him at a leisurely tempo and grabbed him by the shoulder. "Who are you?" It was all Simon could think of asking, and the smile on the face now looking down at him grew cold, but only for an instant. "What do you mean? I'm your roommate, Mikey. And you will make damn sure no one questions that fact. Understood?" There was a coldness in that voice, and the grip on his shoulder got stronger for a split second, strong enough to elicit pain. "Now, give me your car keys. I'm gonna buy a shovel and take care of your problem. Some idiot drove out there with his phone still in his pocket."
What will you do if someone traces your steps? Huh?
Simon was still completely overwhelmed, but a hand on his shoulder squeezed him again until he fished the keys out of his pocket and dropped them onto the other waiting hand. The fingers left his shoulder and patted his head for a second before the person finally stepped away from him and toward the open door.
While I'm gone, I want you to relax. Take a shower, eat something. I cooked spaghetti, and then try and calm down. I really don't need any attention on us from now on. Understood?
Simon was shaking his head. Who was that standing by the open kitchen door now? What was it? The grin didn't waver again.
I'm gonna call the cops,
he stuttered. And for a single moment he could see the two eyes still staring down at him, starting to glow.
If you want to, yeah, you could. But the body will be long gone before you can tell them where it is. And all they will see is me standing there, freaked out and pointing a finger at you. I'm gonna make sure you'll never leave the institution you'll be put in after that little stunt. Got that?
Simon could do nothing but stare back at the figure towering above him.
Good. Then, enjoy your coffee and your meal. And remember, everything is just fine. And I should know since I'm your friend and roommate.
The figure chuckled at the last words.
What's my name again?
Simon almost recoiled. The sharp tone hidden inside these words made him shiver.
Mikey. That's right, killer. Let's keep it that way.
He could hear the thing whistling a happy tune as it made its way out of the apartment, his car keys in hand. Simon looked at the coffee, then at his phone. He was caught, he thought. Whatever had taken Mikey's place was in control. He couldn't call the police, couldn't even scream for help. Simon hung his head and cried as the door to the apartment fell shut with a loud and final bang.